Hello and welcome to this talk about technologies in music. How far have we come and where next? We've assembled a great panel of bleeding-edge practitioners to discuss what technology is out there, how they have been using it or seen it being used, the risks and best practices, and finally we'll speculate on what's on the horizon and where they think we're going to go next. So let me make some introductions. On the far end of the panel we have Amelia Kallman. Amelia is a leading London futurist, speaker and author. As an innovation and technology communicator, Amelia regularly writes, consults, and speaks on the impact of new technologies on the future of business and our lives. She is an expert on the emerging risks of the new realities, VR, AR, and MR, having recently completed authoring a cutting-edge report for Lloyd's of London. She discovers and brings attention to inventive startups, regularly curating events for Wired UK, and she also recently directed the first burlesque show in 360 video. Next, we have Abby Wade, who works on Gestalt, which is a collaborative audio-visual project directed and curated by Abby and fellow composer Joel Wells. Gestalt has the sole focus of creating experimental music works and soundscapes which have an intrinsic relationship to visual art. The duo have a passion for collaborating with other visual artists and musicians, exploring alternative ways of creating music, crossing multiple genres, media, culture, and new technology. There's a lot to be said about how they get their sound. There's a whole bio you sent me that was like beautifully intricate, so we can hopefully get you talking about that later because it's fascinating. Next, we have Alexander Parsons, who is a musician and composer, best known primarily for his work in film and broadcast television, and based in London. In 2017, Alexander became a member of the newly founded international collective Miro Shot, in which he plays his electric violin and Eurorack synthesizer, as well as composing orchestral arrangements. In May 2017, the band held a 3-day residency at the Institute of Modern Art in Amsterdam, in the world's first multi-sensory live VR and mixed reality concert. In June 2017, Alex spent a day in residency at Somerset House, exploring the relationship between music and scent, alongside Edition Perfume founder Timothy Hahn and fellow composer Roman Rapak. And finally, next to me, we have Dan Potter. Dan is a music producer, composer, multi-instrumentalist, teacher, DJ, and experimentalist. He fuses new technologies, live performances, and his imagination to challenge ideas of format, the role of the audience in live music, and the purpose of music in our everyday lives, from DJing and producing electronic music to composing and performing classical music. Dan recently released his critically acclaimed debut album, Orchestra, which combines orchestral instruments, drum machines, synthesizers, and vocals, and includes collaborations with Kate Tempest, Charlie Stark, and other local South London and Brazilian musicians. On top of the sold-out live shows with his 12-piece ensemble, he produced a full live ambisonic showcase of the album at the Albany Theatre, using a 29-channel 360 sound system in collaboration with 3D sound specialist Call and Response. He is currently working on a new album, a 360 immersive opera, and curating a London 3D Sound Festival for April 2019. As for myself, my name is Matthew Dempsey. I am a sound designer, mastering engineer, and webcaster, and I am here to host the talk tonight in my capacity as co-chair of the AES UK London section. So, now that we've got all of the introductions out of the way, now we can get to the proper business of the talk. So, question number one, we're going to start with ideas coming this way. Starting with Amelia, tell us about a project that you've worked on from the immersive VR AR space that has got you excited by its possibilities.
Okay. Well, I didn't actually work on this one, but it is probably one of my favorites that I've seen so far. And it was done by The Mill, and it's a virtual reality experience called Strata. And what they do is they use your biodata, which is things like your sweat rate, your heart rate, your blood pressure, to generate a virtual reality experience in real time. So what this means is that every individual will have a different experience, and it's a really, cool way to start to look at how we can make really personalized experiences. So it generates the sound, it generates the audio, it generates the video, all based on your personal biodata. And to me, why this is really interesting is we can start to look ahead, and there's already startups who are working in neuro reality. So this is being able to use brain-computer interface to generate these experiences. There's one called Neurable out of the States that I'm especially interested in, where you can go ahead and wear it and you can start to navigate these virtual experiences just using your brain and your thoughts. So in the future, what we're looking at is being able to design and create using our thoughts, our imagination, and seeing it for real inside these spaces and creating it, and then being able to capture that and potentially turn it into something real and tangible. And sort of taking that one step further, future generations, instead of looking at photographs, we might be able to make our memories, bring these memories up. So I can be imagining sitting around a fire at my grandparents' house when I was 5 years old on Christmas Eve, and bring this to life in this space, and then be able to invite somebody else into this 360 3D experience. So I think that's my favorite.
That's massively impressive. Thank you. Abby, please.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. Yeah, really interesting. I think a project that I've been involved with is, I'm actually kind of working on one which is probably the most interesting, and it's using a program called TimeMax. I think there's up to 80 channels you can have, and the system goes in, they map the space, and they can put speaker systems all across and work out the dispersion, so the kind of the angle of the sound and how much that's overlapping between each speaker. And the amazing thing is with this is that you can track movement. So if you take a controller for the audience, they could have a controller and it could track them so that they're creating their own experience as they walk around, and follow that from speaker to speaker. You can also put in MIDI triggers. So when a certain trigger is put into the system, it will then trigger whatever you want, basically. You could trigger a whole new section or just a specific sound. That's really interesting. You could also put in weather data. Sorry, I keep creating bass track. It's like I'm beatboxing. Yes, you could also put in... I'm very weather systems, which is really interesting, or any biodata or whatever you want, and then trigger that into the system and set off things across a timeline. So it's kind of does work on a timeline data, but there's also, you can kind of overlap these different parts. So it's really interesting and really cool. That's probably my favourite thing at the moment.
Yeah, sounds amazing. Alex?
Yeah, it does sound really, really impressive. It's quite interesting. As a composer working in TV, I've always been really used to working just with a flat image. And so the idea of working in VR has always been really exciting for me. I guess the project I should really speak about is Miro Shot. And essentially, it's an idea that kind of spawned from conversations and a want to create a music experience that wouldn't kind of overtake anything, isn't designed to kind of become the next biggest way of experiencing music, but it's a way of heightening a music experience. And I guess the interest in VR was huge. And so what our collective, which is a collective of not just musicians, but we have graphic designers, we have artists, we have speakers. I mean, Amelia is also part of the collective, and we're based all around the world. And essentially, what we've developed is it's a live concert experience, and all of the audience are sat in virtual reality. So they'll watch the show, which is a performance. And moments of it you'll be in virtual reality. Moments of it the audience will be in augmented reality. That was one of the things that we felt quite important. Actually, if you go to a concert, you don't want to be there on your own. You want to be there with an audience. So we've worked out a way of using augmented reality to include that as well. We've also worked out a way of synchronizing scent with the songs as well. We're working with a scent artist who has created these kind of tailored fragrances which will be triggered, as well as kind of live coded visuals as well. And all of this in essentially one concert. So yeah, that's really what we're developing at the moment.
That sounds really exciting, especially with scent as well, because scent and hearing are the two things that really trigger our memories and really get us sort of in a place. And like as you were saying with the biofeedback, like a nice combination of these things could create, entire experiences based off someone's own memories alone, or a scent then setting someone's memories off, which then triggers the sound.
Absolutely. I mean, it all goes back to that thing. You walk into your parents' house or something, and those kind of smells just come flooding back. Or you smell something when walking down Brick Lane, and it just reminds you of that time you've been walking there for your whole life. For me, for example. So that sense of nostalgia is often there, and it's a really kind of exciting and really effective way of doing it. I remember the first time that I experienced the actual show in VR. 'Cause normally when I perform, it's essentially just a performance. I don't so much get to experience it, and instantly it was quite powerful. It's quite a visceral. That's the beauty of VR. You can have that kind of visceral feeling that you don't necessarily always get when you're watching the TV or in the cinema. And so yeah, it's a really exciting and interesting medium.
Love it. Okay, and Dan?
I guess I come from a sort of similar background to Alex, kind of composer and music producer, and being inspired by VR technologies and how to sort of incorporate that into live performance, but very much focus more on the sound itself rather than the visuals. But yeah, when I first experienced VR about 3 years ago is when I was making my album, and and just thinking how that these 3D objects in this virtual space relate to sound, and then how we could present the album using these ideas, and then sort of realizing that I knew loads of people that were already doing this kind of thing with 360 sound technology, who actually live on the same street as me in Deptford, and just hooking up with them. And so there's a studio called Call and Response, which is on my street, run by Tom Slater, and just going in there and realizing that you can actually make these things happen already, and that was very inspiring. So we got to work on presenting my album in the Albany Theatre with a 29-channel dome of speakers, using ambisonics, and working out kind of how we could diffuse the instruments in ambisonically live, which became quite complicated actually. And off the back of that, we've now been asked to do a 3-day festival next year at the Albany Theatre, which you mentioned earlier.
Wow, that sounds incredible, and please go see it. Okay, so that leads us to our second question then. What technologies are out there now, and how are they being used? Because I am speaking as a sound designer and a mastering engineer. Most of my space is inside the studio or inside the cinema. I don't explore these spaces. So what's out there? How does it kind of work?
I mean, one thing that kind of grasped my attention, I went to a day's festival not too long ago, and it was a festival based around the idea of touch, essentially. And I mean, this idea of touch is something that we never really associate with sound and music. Well, at least I never really associated it with sound too much. And essentially, it's the idea of kind of using haptics. So, I mean, we're all familiar with haptics in some way through our phones, just by clicking the button, or on our MacBooks, that haptic feedback is the thing that gives us this sense of touch. But one thing that really got my attention at this festival was a company called Ultra Haptics. And I was speaking with Tom Carter, who's the CTO of the company afterwards, and he was explaining to me that they've essentially created, and it's using ultrasound to create kind of invisible objects that you can actually feel. And the things I felt were, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, they were perhaps a little bit sort of basic for now, but you can see that very quickly these kind of small conical shapes, which weren't actually there, could quite easily transform into something like a car control, which is I think one of their aims. So we'll have, instead of a flat screen, and that's the problem with Tesla, for example, at the moment. You've got this enormous, what looks like an iPad in there, but actually if you're driving, you don't want to be sort of fiddling around. You want to be able to grab something and move it. And I think the possibilities of this are amazing. And one thing we've been doing with Miro is incorporating touch in some respect. There's a company called Subpack who are doing some really exciting things. And that's less so on the actual physical touch things, but it's actually it's kind of a sense of kind of feeling as you're listening to the music.
I've seen those. They represent sub-bass frequencies. So if you're a bedroom producer, or you're in a small space, or you really want to experience the sub without having to drive your speakers overly hard, you wear this pack, and it converts the sub bass into vibration, so you feel it instead. That's right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's amazing how effective it is. Because you'll know when you're sat. You'll know from when you're sat in the studio, and something. And when you're in the cinema as well, you get that sub rumble, and you feel it. And actually, just wearing a pack on your back, it's surprising how effective that sensation is. And actually, as a mixing tool, it's surprisingly effective as well. So so haptics is something that really does interest me, and just the idea and the magic of being able to just touch something that isn't there. It's scary but exciting, I think, at the same time.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to chime in?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of haptics, and it's nice to hear you talk about ultra haptics as well. And that kind of idea about, I sound isn't my forte, but I've been writing about it because I work in the new realities. And I got really excited last year. I have a friend who is a sound designer. He does the sound for the Grammys and for Bjork and for all these amazing people. And I had never really thought about it before, about how when you're, looking at somebody on the stage, and actually the sound is coming from a stack of speakers over here that's been mixed and it's coming at you from different directions. So looking at directional acoustics, L Acoustics, they have Elisa, and I got to experience the island, which is an island. It's for very, very, very rich people. And it's kind of like a circle bedroom, bed kind of, and it has 48 channels of speakers around you, so it completely immerses you in this sound bath that is kind of unlike anything you can get anywhere else, even in a cinema. And then they have the one for the entire room, which is the ocean. And what I really liked about that one was that it was virtually invisible. So when I'm looking at producing experiences in 360 in VR, you have to have the sound that is directional as well, or else the experience is just going to fall flat. This is becoming a prerequisite for this entire industry. So that to me has been really cool. And then I guess the other really neat one that I've seen is Neurophone, which are headphones that personalize to you. So everybody's ears are different. We all hear things differently. This ear is different from that ear. And to be able to have these earphones that get to know how you hear things, and they also have haptics in the phones that feed back to you that sensation, it allows us to appreciate music and sound in a way that we have not been able to appreciate it before. And that's what really excites me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's beautiful. I remember seeing some time ago, I forget the artist, and it's a really big artist, so it's terrible of me. But she's been working with gloves.
Imogen
Heat, yeah. Who's been working with these gloves, and it's almost like Star Trek. You move your hands through the space, or like a theremin. You move your hands through the space, and sound is created. You can craft that using like your hands as tools. You're going back to being a musician, using your hands to create sound.
Yeah, it's all through MIDI, basically, and you can set the parameters however you want. So you could decide that when you go like this, it gets louder, or when you go like this, you get vibrato that goes crazy, or whatever. So, yeah, really cool. I mean, there's lots of interesting things. MIDI's been around for ages, but
Did you realise it's also the only software protocol that's still in version 1?
Really? It's pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, it's been there for ages, but it works, and it's how it's utilized to... Where do I need to point this so it doesn't rumble? So, yeah, utilize it to connect with new technologies. So I'm really interested in architecture and talking about hidden speaker systems and stuff. I work with a company called Hawley. They engineer a lot of big installations. So they did Beehive, that kind of thing. And their speaker systems are all integrated into architecture, so you're actually creating the sound system as you create the building, which is really interesting, and working with the design of the building to react to, and talking again with Timax and kind of creating these kind of systems that are really harmonious with the space. I think that's really interesting, and also it can be so specific to the location. So they're connecting, like I was saying before, they're connecting a weather vane, so it's connecting directly to the space you're in. So when it starts raining, maybe the music changes, you know, and we're not having these playlists that kind of are just created by, I don't know, Topshop, and they just go in every single Topshop all across the whole country, and thinking a little bit more carefully about these experiences and what people are having when they go into these spaces. I think that's really interesting.
It's got my brain thinking about just how the acoustics would work with hidden speaker systems in a building of like mass size. That's incredibly complicated.
Yeah, these guys are pretty crazy engineers, yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, anyone else have anything to add?
I was just going to say that it's kind of a bit related to that. Been quite interested in 360 microphone technology and using it within spaces and how to exploit the creative sort of possibilities of that. Working with my mate here, Luke Harris, who's a professional sound recordist, and then just working out ways of how to edit these recordings to kind of just to enhance the space that you're recording in. So I was lucky enough to be able to use Southwark Cathedral to record my cousin, who's a countertenor, and placing him in lots of different locations within the cathedral and keeping the microphone in the middle, and just the kind of editing opportunities that you get from that. But to be honest, quite a lot of this stuff's a little bit technically above me, and I try and work out ways of keeping things quite simple. You know, I've worked with Max MSP in the past and doing installations and things like that. And from recent experiences of working with sort of 360 sound systems, it's quite costly to set up. And I'm excited about where we're going in the future, and simplifying these things a little bit with the technology and the devices that we might be, you know, carrying in our pockets or wearing, you know, everyday devices. But I think we're going to move on to that in a bit, aren't we?
Oh yes, we're shifting on. Moving on to question 3. What are the risks of all this new technology? How could it be abused, and how can we protect ourselves?
Well, yeah, I just wrote a 60-page report on the risks of the new realities, so I can go on and on about this. But so sort of looking at 3 specific areas: the human risks as far as physical and mental, and then the data risks. So the thing about these technologies is, because they are very much in their infancy, we don't have long-term studies, so we do not yet know how they actually are going to impact our brains. But one thing we do know is that because it is that much more realistic and it engages that much more of our senses, that it can produce false memories. So, you know, the idea that if you have a traumatic experience inside a virtual world, your brain actually can't decipher whether it was real or not. And we're seeing things like developers who spend a lot of time inside the metaverse are coming out of it feeling this dislocation, in that their instincts to walk into traffic, because in VR, in the metaverse, you can walk into traffic, you can walk off a cliff and nothing happens, you don't get hurt. So you have this dislocation between what's real and what's not. So I think there's a definite danger there. And we do know as well that at the moment, all these headsets that we're talking about, they're completely hackable. They don't have anything in there that is blocking it from being hacked. So if your main system gets hacked through an email phishing link or something, that means that somebody can hack into your virtual reality headsets, and they can change things like boundaries. So, where you think you're, walking, where you think the wall's been moved and you can fall down the stairs. But I think, that's not quite as likely. But when you talk about changing the content, I think last year there was this whole scandal with Peppa Pig on YouTube where kids were watching Peppa Pig and then all of a sudden it turned into a bloody massacre. So this is something that could actually, a way that people could hack the content of this kind of thing. And yeah, like I said, I could go on and on about this, but those are a couple examples.
Wow. Please do.
Yeah.
I guess a slightly different kind of risk if you're working in virtual reality. And I mean, it's very much less so about things like data protection and the sort of scary nature of new technology. It's actually, one thing that I've found in working in sort of broadcast TV is it's very much all about story. And actually, the minute you have a new medium, it becomes, the most obvious and exciting thing to do is make it visually impressive. And I think one of the dangers of working in new mediums is that, if you have these kind of really super impressive things going on, they will last for a short amount of time, but without that kind of fundamental idea of story, or, in the musical world, without that great song, then, surely enough, you will end up with something that either dates or is just less impressive, or just it becomes very boring very quickly. So, I mean, there are lots of, there's some kind of great, in going back to kind of the idea of kind of TV, there are actually some really great sort of TV companies that have started moving into virtual reality. I say virtual reality, really more 360 film. So you're in a space and you're able to look around the space rather than control the space you're in. But a lot of these companies, Parable VR, are absolutely brilliant documentary company set up by David Wise. And they're absolutely fantastic at creating these 360 documentaries that have a phenomenal story and are also visually brilliant to watch. And also, I mean, have another company, Breaking Forth, that are based out in King's Cross. I've worked with them, as composer on some of their projects as well. And one very specific project that I worked on that they did was this fantastic animated drama called Lucid. But the heart of it, it was I wouldn't want to give away the story in case you do get a chance to experience it.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, I won't. But it's a sort of 3-layered story essentially. So always at the heart of their work, they were really, really focused on the fact that actually, you need to be telling a fantastic story, or you need to have a great song, and that still needs to be the basis of what you're doing, not something that is just kind of embracing that technology and abusing it, and then sort of, it will then lead to being forgotten.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing about sort of cheap one-shots, where someone sort of has an idea and goes like, oh, this would be a great idea, and there'll be a great reveal in it. But that reveal only happens once, and you kind of lose. Like, you go, oh, great, that's great, I've seen that now, that's done. Whereas with our favourite television shows, our favourite films, our favourite songs, we come back to them time and time again. They evoke a deeper meaning. They've got a deeper connection. It's moved you emotionally, and you look to come back to that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I think it's so important. And then it's the idea of just being able to enjoy it over and over again. I mean, quite often you'll find that in VR, I mean, a lot of kind of people making VR film were also gamers as well. And so you'll find, Easter eggs making their way into film, which is just amazing, and it's brilliant kind of discovering those things. And that's kind of the joy, and it's the joy of kind of working in a medium that is new and kind of more exciting in a way than your traditional kind of TV or cinema environment. It's very different, but it is new and it's exciting, so you can do lots of different things with it.
Yeah, lovely. I completely agree. Has anyone else got anything to add?
Well, I wrote down computer processing power here, so that's a bit boring compared to what they've been talking about. But
It's
just
still
to
important.
follow on a little bit, I think most technological advancements throughout history have been met with a kind of fear and resistance. The introduction of equal temperament as a universal tuning system was met with quite a lot of resistance, and TV and radio, which has made listening a bit more of an intimate experience, was also met with resistance. And whenever I talk about what I think is going to happen in the future, which I know very little about, to other people, it's usually met with, bloody hell, that sounds scary. But I think we need to embrace these things with caution, but also realise how important politics is with this, and that in an unequal world, we have the potential to sort of abuse this new networked organism that we're going to become part of. I think could be quite scary. So I think it's not just the technology; it's the political system that we're in that we need to think very much about as well at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, to add on to that, a lot of the real money behind this stuff is Google and big corporate companies that are putting a lot of money into like the neuroscience of it all, and decision making, and what are we thinking, and all that kind of stuff. And that is, I know you kind of touched on it, that kind of psychological power that they're going to have will be insane. So yeah, that's kind of quite scary to think about.
So I saw a little article recently which sort of blew my mind. Facebook are creating a camera so that you can use it to talk straight to Facebook and talk to your loved ones and use Messenger. I'm like, seriously? After the whole Cambridge Analytica thing mixed with the fact that Facebook recently got hacked, and now you think it's a good time to bring out something that literally looks and listens into your house personally.
Yeah, so that, and Amazon as well are going to create a camera in the boxes. So when you open up the box, there's a camera so you can say thank you. It's like, well, you don't know who sent you the package, so that's weird. Yeah.
Yeah, but then, I mean, as you were saying, Dan, it's scary and there's things to watch out for. But this is the whole point. If we're watching out for it, if we use these technologies responsibly, if we keep an eye on how they are being used and don't use them, like if Facebook's abusing, then we don't use Facebook, as an example. Any service gets found misusing the technology, we have the right as consumers to not use it. There are many other platforms that we can use. I mean, that's one of the things.
Yeah, I think we're at a really pivotal place with our relationship with technology, in that we're getting, within the next 5 to 10 years, we're not going to have a choice anymore. And at the moment, I think consumers do have more power than we are allowed to believe, especially with things like Facebook, Google, Amazon, all those big ones. They need us, and they need our data. And it's up to you whether you choose or not to participate in that, I think.
Interesting. Lots of...
Yeah, I think much of modern civilization has been about the sort of individual pursuit, and I think music essentially should be a collaborative thing, and these new technologies and the new networks that we're going to become part of, and I think they're going to blur the lines between not just the performer, the composer, and the audience, but also what we see as what is an individual, and I think that can be quite an exciting prospect for future music collaborations.
Science and art becoming magic.
Yeah.
Andy Farnell did a lecture recently for the AES where he was discussing about a completely unrelated field to what we're discussing today, but one of the things that he did raise was there was the concerned scientists, the board of concerned scientists, looking at things like climate change, things that will affect our scenario. One of the things that came up was something that I don't think many of us have thought about, is that we can't bootstrap ourselves as a civilization anymore. We can't, if the example he gave was has anyone heard of the Toaster Project? The idea was given to a bunch of engineers to go right, build a toaster from scratch with, you have to smelt the metals, you have to make your own plastics, you've got to, and the thing lasted for about 2 seconds before blowing up. But that just goes to show, if a bunch of engineers now, we rely so much on the production process that's already in place, like the line between technology and magic is sort of blurring already. Interesting times. So, moving on. What are the current best practices in the media that is being created? What seems to be patterns and behaviours that people seem to be settling on as like this is how it should be done and this is how it should be used. And how can these be improved? Like, has the technology got intrinsic flaws because it's early days and we go, oh, that would be nice, and then it'll work better? Like, is there anything like that people think of?
Well, I think, definitely in terms of kind of how things can improve, I think sharing ideas and sharing practices is something that, quite a lot of people working in VR are trying to do, and listening to audiences as well, because I mean it's such a new medium that everyone is still discovering things that work, things that don't work. I mean, for a long time there was an issue whereby if for example you were sat in a car and it was going at a certain speed but you weren't moving, you'd get that feeling of nausea. For a while that was causing a lot of people grief, but people seem to have been able to nail that one now. Whether it's the audience getting used to it through just constant exposure, or it's a way that it's being coded or designed slightly differently. But the only way we can really find that out is by asking the audience. I mean, while we were in Amsterdam on our 3-day residency with Miro Shot, one of the things that we made sure that we did, essentially we had 6 shows a day, and after each show, we would, gather in a slightly different part of the Institute of Modern Art out there with our audience and speak to as many of them as we possibly could, and just find out, what they thought of the experience. Did they enjoy it? Did they hate it? Did they feel sick? What was effective? What wasn't? Was it too much? I mean, sometimes you think if you've got all of these things happening visually, and it's multi-sensory, so you have your scent, you've got your touch, and all of these kind of visuals are constantly changing along with the music as well. Is that way too much? And some people said yes, but only by asking and sharing the ideas can you create something that really works. And I think this is kind of something that will kind of cross so many fields in these new technologies.
Yeah, I think as engineers and people who are on the front edge, looking at technology, sometimes we forget that just because you can do a thing doesn't mean you should. And just because you go, this is an amazing technology, doesn't mean it's going to be adopted by people who are going to go, yeah, okay, I don't need that. And it might be like, well, that's bleeding edge technology, but there's no purpose, but you have to find a purpose for it. Anyone else want to jump in?
Well, I think with 3D sound and 360 sound systems, learning from how much infrastructure you need to set that up properly, especially in a space that's big enough for an audience. It's quite complicated and you need a lot of resources, and I don't think it's the kind of thing that's going to be common within people's homes. I don't think consumers are going to, cinema 5.1 has been around for ages, but none of my friends have got that in their house, So I kind of, although it's important to experiment with this technology, I think it's also important to sort of look forward to how this kind of technology might be realised on a consumer level. We've got Sonos systems in our households now, which are anything but sort of spatialised sound, aren't they? It's just a little thing in the corner. So I guess it's kind of how the devices that we're going to be wearing in the future may interact with the other devices that we have within our homes, and how spatial 360 3D sound could be realised within that kind of environment, which I think is quite exciting, actually. Be much more simple, potentially.
Maybe. But this leads me to thinking, like you were talking earlier about technology with biometrics, which to my mind would imply some form of sensor that's being used. So are we thinking maybe less headphones for the future and more direct brain input?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I talk about quite a bit. I mean, I think within the next 10 years, we're going to start to see the first examples of the actual brain implants and people being able to actually turn on and off a part of their brain like they do their mobile phone. So I think that's definitely already happening. I know that like Elon Musk's Neuralink is all about that. But there's so many dangers in that. We as people take it for granted that our thoughts are private, and as soon as you put technology inside the head, then you're susceptible to be hacked. Those thoughts are no longer private. But that being said, this is what is being called now a friction. Having to put a headset on is a friction between experiencing the metaverse. So I do think that we're going to get to the point where our headsets are going to have different channels, so we can switch to AR, VR, MR easily. The sensors will live inside the headsets before they live inside our heads, so it will be able to interact with our thoughts and our biochemistry. And then also, embedding this with artificial intelligence. I think these headsets are going to get to the point where they're going to be able to say, actually, we're going to stop this right now because you haven't eaten in the last 24 hours and you need to drink water and you need to go outside.
Oh my God, getting nagged by your headphones.
Yeah, exactly.
But it does make a fair point, particularly with video gaming being the prime example. Is that there's plenty of people who'll sit down for a game, get invested in the medium, or even watching a box set on Netflix, and you're sat there for ages, and eventually Netflix goes, "Sorry, do you want to keep watching this? You realise you've been here for the last 8 hours. Surely you need to go to the loo." So yeah, I think like initially joking about being nagged by your headphones, but that would actually solve a lot of problems with immersive experiences that become too immersive. If you go too far in, at some point you need the call back to life and going, deal with your biological needs, please. Talk to some people, eat, drink, see some sunshine, get some vitamin D before you start falling a bit. Anyone else got anything else to add? Which leads us to question number 5. So we've been through what's already here, and we've already started moving on to this question, which is what's the future? What's on the horizon? What new movements do you see on the bleeding edge, and what looks interesting? So sort of furthering on what we were just talking about. You were just about to bring something up earlier.
I think we were just talking about it.
Damn.
Let someone else go first. I'll cut in a bit.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
I guess we kind of touched on it earlier. So the new technology where you can map your ear and you're actually recording sounds to sound like what you would hear. So I think it was BBC that were behind it initially, but I don't know who took it over. But they would mold your ear and then use I guess the data to create the sound to sound like it was inside your head, basically, which is really interesting. Sennheiser have also come up with a new recording device which records binaural. That's right, how do you say it, isn't it? Binaural. And that's really interesting. So there you can go around, because I love doing sound recordings. So I'm really interested in this kind of 360 device, which is should be available soon to go out and do your sound recordings with that. So that's really interesting new technology that's out there. What else? Obviously, we've kind of talked about the biological data being thing, but a lot of it's already there. Like we wear our watches, and that's already recording our steps. So it's interesting to think about that and tempo and matching that, which is already possible. But going further with that, maybe not into the mind as such, but that kind of stuff's really interesting as well.
I think 5G is going to make a really big impact on the creating the experiences and being able to upload things, being able to make things happen really fast. So Double Me is a company that works out of Ravensbourne University, and they do holoportation. So this is in mixed reality. You're able to, I got to do it the other day. It's really cool. It's very much like a Star Trek, beam me up, Scotty kind of moment. So I'm being filmed in one room with two connects, and then a 3D 360-degree hologram of me in real time is being projected to a HoloLens, which is, on the other side of the university, or can be on the other side of the world. And it's like I am there in full size speaking and having these kind of conversations. So it's being used now for people to sign business deals across countries, to be able to, people who are homebound, their grandparents and stuff can come and have a play date with them. But they have started or are launching a new thing called Loop Space, and this is going to become the YouTube of the metaverse, which is very cool. So I will be able to make videos that can be seen in 360, 3D, and then I'll be able to holoport my friend in, so we'll be able to co-host a video together, and my friend can be on the other side of the world. So to me, that gets really cool really fast. And I mean, if you're talking about musicians and bands and stuff, we might get to a point where they don't even have to go on tour, that they can actually be projected into people's homes, into other environments. And then also looking at, not to replace the real live experience, but then to supplement that. So if a concert sells out, are you, you're no longer necessarily out of luck. You have other ways and means to be there in 360 video, which is different from virtual reality.
Yeah, the McFly did this. Not precisely this, but in 2012, McFly, of all bands, sorted out a streaming service. So they streamed their gig and put it behind a paywall. So if you were anywhere else on the planet and wanted to be at the gig, well, you were seeing the web stream. You would pay your money for a ticket, same way anyone else would, and you would get the experience of the concert web streaming as it was there. So yes, then to increase the experience by adding three-dimensionality to it, having it projected inside your room, that's quite exciting. Wonderful.
Being someone who kind of experiments with these technologies but also writes acoustic music, it very much excites me about the potentials that these technologies can have in terms of inspiring new forms in music when it comes to just writing for, it could be just for a string quartet or a brass ensemble, but how experimenting with these technologies and being inspired by it can in turn, create new musical genres and that don't necessarily use these technologies at all. I think with most technological developments, you get that in music. You get these new genres springing up, like Steve Reich, for example, his tape experiments and minimalism and things like that. So I don't think we have to restrict ourselves just to using these new technologies.
Well, kind of to bounce off of that too, what I think we're going to find with these technologies is it can actually create synesthetic experiences. So we're all born with synesthesia, which is when your wires get crossed, kind of where you taste something and you see a color, or you hear something and you get a taste in your mouth, that kind of thing. And I think that these technologies we may find is actually going to open up this dormant part of our brains to be able to enhance creativity and kind of democratize this genius that's associated with synesthesia.
Yeah, I know. Ministry of Sound, I think it was, installed a Dolby Atmos rig inside their gig so that they could use an object-based sound system to start moving things around. So the stereoscopic space extended to, instead of having a wall of sound that's in you that you then create a stereoscopic image from, instead, wherever you are in the venue, you then have your own unique experience as the sounds move around you, get close to you, move away from you, move around you. There's some exciting stuff happening there in terms of a full music experience and making new genres of it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as well that the differentiation between what is music and what is sound that you hear every day. And obviously we've got augmented reality, but there's also the whole side of augmented audio where you're taking live audio and then creating music from that live. So as you walk past, you could take the sound of the feet and then create a rhythm from that. I mean, that's the basic thing, but it's much more complicated that you can, add in various factors to create more complex algorithms that create music, and that's really interesting, I think, as well. Kind of using and also linking that to the visual experience. So maybe you walk into a mountain and then your footsteps become hugely reverb because it's all bouncing around the space. That kind of thing's really interesting as well.
Yes, yeah, I can't help but be reminded of Tyres from Spaced. Here's one sound and then makes an entire dance track in his head. Well, why can't we do that now with technology?
I guess the one thing I would add, and it's not so much about kind of brand new technology, but actually it's something I read the other day that kind of got me really excited, and it's about the kind of film and TV industry, which is notoriously slow, and to catch up on new technologies and to embrace them. But actually, in the last few weeks, the government, as part of their industrial strategies, has released a huge amount of budget into the idea of kind of creating an immersive storytelling strand, which is brilliant. And this budget is going towards bringing some of the biggest filmmakers, people like Alex Garland, obviously Ex Machina and Annihilation, through to Asif Kapadia, who kind of made Amy and Senna. These people are actually embracing VR and AR, and actually kind of it's an acknowledgement that people like the BBC are actually really kind of behind these technologies. And it's that sort of thing that kind of really pushes everything forward. And it might be that actually that's pretty slow. Everyone's been doing VR for years now, and finally, the government are catching up. But actually, this kind of acknowledgement is something that the industry really, really needs. And so, not a new technology, but that is something that I thought kind of is something that's really worth noting now.
It's quite impressive, the white paper library that the AES has about things that the BBC have put in, lots of R&D have thrown in. The technology couldn't be made to be used at the time because there were just factors like computing power wasn't strong enough. And now we're getting into a point where actually looking back over some of those old white papers, you start going like, no, these thoughts were already being had. Now it's time to start implementing them and start using them. So,
I mean, what I should add is that, I wouldn't ever say that the BBC are behind in terms of VR or anything like that. For a long time, Zilla Watson has been really behind VR, and they have a whole VR strand that they've been pushing for a long time. So it's been there for a while. But to get such huge people involved and creating these whole kind of new movements of VR, for me, that's what's exciting. So I think it has been there, but this is kind of a big acknowledgement, I think, which is brilliant.
Always good to see. Has anyone got anything else to add? Right. Now I look at all of you lovely people. We have a microphone at the front. Does anyone have any questions? If so, would you like to come up to the front and ask your question to the panel?
Is this the one?
That's the one. Thank you, sir.
Nobody's really mentioned artificial intelligence in all this, which seems to be making inroads into all sorts of areas of sound, and indeed story development, content development. But a lot of this could in future be automated to a very great extent, but nobody's mentioned it. But that we don't know how far it's going to go, of course. And there's been a bit of a fall-off in interest in VR. It seems to have peaked a bit. Will it recover from that peak?
So, there you go, panel.
That's good questions. Excuse me. I think with the VR, AR, MR, it will come to a tipping point where it will reach more of an adoption. I personally think that mixed reality is going to be more important than virtual reality. I think that both will have its place. But what I love about mixed reality is that it allows people to remain inside their environment and with the people actually around them. So I can still look you in the eye, we can still have a conversation, Whereas in virtual reality, you're very much in your own space and zone. And I'm starting to see now places that are trying to get people together in a physical space to then go into a metaverse, into a virtual space to have these experiences. So the social aspect, I think, is going to be the biggest tipping point for the mass adoption. I think also, like you said, with the filmmakers, giving people these real reasons to want to try it and want to do it. One of the disadvantages of it's an industry really in its infancy. If we look at it, the Oculus only got kickstarted in 2012, and then it was bought by Facebook in 2014 and didn't even really come out to consumers until 2016. So a lot of these early experiences that people had where it made them feel sick, it's because the technology wasn't there yet. The technology is developing so fast that we're getting to a point now where it's becoming a lot more sophisticated and people aren't having those kind of experiences anymore, except that put a lot of people off at the beginning. So it's constantly in need of this kind of, refresh, staying out there, giving people new reasons to come and be a part of it. And then as far as AI is, so embedded into everything. And absolutely, I see this as a huge part of the future of this industry. The idea that, content is already being integrated with AI, the experiential commerce, X-commerce inside the metaverse, being able to walk through a space and having things recognize when you're looking at them, how long you're looking at them, and then that generating an experience further in. So I'm seeing this billboard of Coca-Cola, and then I walk into a room and there's a bar and they're pouring a bottle of Coke, and suddenly I'm coming out and I'm thinking, geez, I really am thirsty, And I think it's the invisibleness of artificial intelligence integrated into these systems is already starting to be a big player and will continue to really shape this industry, especially from a commerce point of view.
I'd agree. Interesting question, and it's one that you're right hadn't come up. And I think part of that is because as musicians, the one thing that I'm sure that all of us would fear is replacement. But actually, it's kind of going back to what you were saying about mixed realities and being there with your friends, but also using these experiences and this technology to enhance what we do rather than replace it. So I guess in terms of artificial intelligence, what really interests me isn't so much artificially created music, but actually, what could really help musicians and creators actually create this music, this content. So it's how could we work with AI, or how could AI, help heighten what we do as creators, not replace it. So, it's been rumored for a long time that Spotify would include, AI music in some of their playlists. No one really knows, but, it's a rumor. And, a lot of I've heard quite a lot of piano music, which is quite effective. I think it's quite effective. But for me, at least, at the moment, it's lacking quite a lot of personality, which I think, even though it's there, it's musical, it's technically brilliant. But for me, at the moment, it kind of lacks that personality. And how or whether that will improve is, we can only wait and see.
But I think no matter how much personality it develops, as long as there's creative people, we'll work out ways of interacting with it and using it creatively.
Agreed.
Instead of just letting it replace us. In terms of the VR thing, I think I kind of agree with this gentleman's what he was saying in his question. For me, you're going to hit me, but it's having an audience with these just things slapped over their faces, and actually you do it in a much more interesting way than that. But didn't really inspire me. But it's the technology itself that's inspiring for me, and potentially where it's going to go in the future. But how it can inspire your music, not having the whole audience kind of just covered up like that.
Yeah, another tool in the toolbox, as it were, something we can use. Anyone else got a question? Thank you very much. embedded in the plant. Feel free to move it.
I was going to say it's great that we're getting handed all this new technology, but does it kind of scare you? And do you think that at one point we're already getting handed all this technology, but at one point we're going to kind of get sick of it and want to go back to the old things that we used to use, because it's actually kind of scary. It's so, like you say with the VR, it's kind of antisocial, and it's scary, honestly.
I mean, Jack White famously, in his recording techniques, set up an entire completely analog, spent millions on equipment so he could just press LPs again because he wanted that sound. I think that certainly, there will always be a taste to certain sounds and to certain methods of production because of the nostalgic feel to it. But these technologies are allowing for a different art form to be made. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I'd definitely say that's fair. I think that's a really good question, by the way. Because, it can be scary when you're faced with, new technologies and we don't all quite understand them. Who really knows what the effects, like you were saying earlier, who really knows what the effects will actually be? But, if we can use these to just heighten what we do, then, that I think is good progress and exciting. So I think, that's a good thing to do. In terms of kind of people sort of not, actively moving away from those, I think there are definitely movements, people getting, instead of having smartphones, Nokia brought out their old phone again with Snake on it that we all used to love. And, people were buying it. It was popular. So I think that kind of shunning of technology is a thing that's happening. I mean, not just technology as well, but drinking. There was that kind of stat on the radio I think this morning I was listening, where something like a third of young people of a certain age are teetotal, as opposed to, say, 10 years ago, it was, I think, 1 in 5. So there's definitely this shift away from technology and what we maybe saw as normality at the moment. So, yeah, interesting points.
I think people have always feared new technology. I was talking about the introduction of equal temperament, the tuning system that we universally use now. And in the book that I was reading, I don't know whether this is true or not, but they talk about this guy that apparently went into this church and heard this equal tempered organ for the first time, and how unnatural that sounded to him, and he went and killed himself after that. So I'd like to think that
Bit severe.
maybe the technology is getting more scary, but we're kind of evolving with it as well, and not so nuts like people from the Renaissance times. But yeah, kind of also, I think these technologies kind of grow and then they become more efficient, and then people realise that we need to go back to analog ways for a bit, and it's kind of comes in waves, doesn't it? So
I would also, I would also say that I think it's very generational. So I think that, it's easy for me to say that I'm scared of it, and I'm a futurist, but it is quite scary, I agree. And it's kind of like the more the harder it is to kind of swallow that pill. But, I did an experiment 2 years ago when the HTC Vive came out, and it measured the biodata of people ages 3 to 80 as they tried virtual reality for the first time. And anybody, from like mid-20s on into adults, older adults and stuff, their data showed this hill climb. And it was, we're not in Kansas anymore. It was this kind of uncomfortable, okay, this is weird, I don't know what I'm doing. Whereas kids and teenagers had this initial like, whoa, isn't this cool? And then their data went right back to reality, like what it was before the experience. So these kids who are growing up on iPads, growing up on smartphones, growing up on virtual reality, growing up with AI, robots, Alexa, they're going to be the ones who probably are going to have it much more embedded in their lives.
I think it's all about balance, really. I mean, as a composer, I write a lot of music on the computer, but, there's nothing like getting out a cello and playing it for the sake of it, and the feeling that you get is very different. So I think, but I also love to write with the computers because the possibilities are there and it makes it accessible to so many more people, which is great. Before it was just hugely expensive to go into a studio and write this kind of stuff. So I think it's really interesting, and the same thing with kids growing up with these kind of iPads. That's all great, and there's so many possibilities with that, but they have to get outside and they have to kind of build their motor skills and be able to climb as well, because otherwise they're going to turn into, what was that film where they're all blobs and sitting in the chairs?
Wall-E.
You know, so I think it's all about balance, really.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your question. Does anybody else like to? I see no hands. So we got one. Please come on up.
I'm interested for you to expand on what you said about these technologies having their own identity, because we seem to keep comparing what we are creating similar to reality. It's like saying a fake plant is so beautiful that it looks real, and if a real plant is so beautiful that it looks fake. Or, for instance, when people were trying to create vegetarian food that tastes the same as the real thing. So why do we need to compare to something that it is tangible? How can we talk about those things without relating them to something that we know? So that we start to make that balance, make that distinction, and then allowing people to make choices of that has got its own right because it allows you to do that. The other thing has got its own right because it allows you these other things. So I was wondering if you can expand on the fact if those new technologies are actually started to be talked about as for what they are, not compared to what they represent or reproduce.
Thank you.
I guess the kind of new musical possibilities and new genres is kind of part of that, where we're not trying to recreate a genre that's already there. We're trying to look at these possibilities and go, well, where can we take music composition? Where can we take experiences that do take you somewhere else that you can't go in the real world?
I mean, I suppose you was saying about how we compare it to things that are already existing. But in order to really sort of get a grip to some new technology, you need to have context. Without context, take for example an iPhone. If you were to give it to a caveman, he would just go, "Yeah, it's shiny and black." Like what? And then we go like, "Oh, but you can listen to music on it. You can do this." And you go, "Well, there's no context in the mind. It's like, well, what's it like?" So I think context is sort of the initial thing. But as you were all saying earlier, and you particularly, Amelia, was that with this current generation, they're making up the rules as they go along, the same way as generations back have done with technology that they've had at the time, that their parents have gone like, well, that's scary, and what's the use of that? And younger people are looking at it going, I know how I can use that, and applying their creativity to it to then give it purpose and give it its own context.
That goes back to what I was saying earlier about the Steve Reich experiments and how these tape recorders were not designed to do what he was doing with them, but then he used them in a creative way, and a whole genre, a whole world of new music sprung from just these simple experiments, this new technology. So, yeah.
I guess we could say the same kind of thing with, things like old Roland equipment as well, just created genres by being used in incorrect ways. So, I mean, yeah, that's definitely a thing to think about. I mean, it's all part of the process, really, isn't it? It's kind of, like you were saying, it's a way to understand something is we need to be able to relate to it. And I think at the moment, perhaps we're just processing it. And once we understand it, once we're all used to it and once we're all regularly using it, it becomes its own entity. So I think, potentially that will happen. But maybe we're not there yet. Maybe we're still kind of working towards that.
Cool. Anyone else got a question? Am I seeing no more hands? Going once, going twice. Okay, well, in that case, I think that we've explored a lot of subject matter tonight, a lot of possibilities, and I think we can all agree there's a lot of food for thought and a lot more thought we need to put into what we're doing to make the best use of everything technology-wise, but we've got some really exciting stuff coming up. Can we please show our appreciation for our panel, please?